Have you ever noticed how some people seem to build incredible wealth while others making similar salaries somehow never get ahead financially? You know the type I'm talking about. They're not doctors or lawyers or tech entrepreneurs making six figures. They're teachers, electricians, administrative assistants, and retail managers, making what most people would consider a comfortable but absolutely average income. And yet, somehow, these ordinary people with ordinary jobs have managed to accumulate $1 million or more in net worth. Meanwhile, other people making even more money seem perpetually stressed about money, living paycheck to paycheck despite earning decent salaries. So, what's the secret? How are regular people with regular incomes somehow cracking the code to becoming millionaires? My name is Lenny, and I spend way too much time analyzing wealth patterns and trying to understand why some people build fortunes while others don't. If you've ever wondered how someone making $50,000 a year can become a millionaire, while someone making $100,000 struggles with debt, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up if it helps demystify how ordinary people build extraordinary wealth. Now, before we dive into the specific strategies that make millionaires out of regular folks, let me be incredibly clear about something important. Building $1 million net worth without a high income isn't about some secret that rich people don't want you to know. It's not about lottery tickets or cryptocurrency or any other get-rich-quick scheme that dominates the financial advice space these days. It's actually way simpler than that, and simultaneously way harder, because it requires something most people refuse to do consistently over many years. It requires patience, discipline, and the willingness to delay gratification in a culture that's obsessed with immediate consumption. Here's the uncomfortable truth that financial gurus don't like to emphasize because it's not sexy or exciting. Building wealth is mostly boring. It's not glamorous. It's not something that makes for exciting dinner party conversation. Becoming a millionaire on an average income is actually pretty straightforward mathematically, but it demands behavioral discipline that most people simply don't possess. Let me start with the foundation of everything, and this is going to sound almost insultingly basic, but stay with me because most people miss this fundamental principle. The only way to build wealth is to spend less money than you earn and invest the difference over time. That's it. That's the entire secret. Spend less than you make, invest the surplus, and let compound growth do the heavy lifting over decades. If you're making $50,000 a year and you manage to save and invest just $5,000 annually, you're going to build wealth over time. If you're making $100,000 a year and you spend $105,000, you're going to go backwards no matter how much you earn. This is where most wealth building discussions go wrong. People obsess over increasing income when they should be obsessing over decreasing expenses. Now I know what you're thinking. Lenny, surely you need a massive income to build $1 million in net worth. And that's where you'd be wrong. Let me run the actual numbers for you, because when I tell people this math, they usually assume I'm exaggerating. Let's imagine someone earns $45,000 a year in gross income. After taxes and everything, they take home roughly $33,000 annually. Now, most people would look at that number and say, you can't possibly save enough to become a millionaire. But let's see what happens if they get intentional about it. If they manage to save just $10,000 per year and invest it in a basic index fund earning 8% annual returns, let's calculate where they'll be. After 10 years of consistent saving and investing, they'll have accumulated approximately $145,000 in invested assets. After 20 years, that number grows to $457,000. But here's where compound growth gets absolutely insane. After 30 years of saving and investing just $10,000 annually, they'll have over $1.2 million in net worth. And that's with absolutely zero salary increases over those 3 decades, which obviously won't happen in real life. Most people will see salary increases throughout their careers, meaning they could save substantially more over time. But even if they don't, even if they maintain this exact $10,000 annual savings rate forever, they're going to cross the millionaire threshold. That's the power of compound growth over extended time periods. It's not magic, it's mathematics and patience. Now let me address the obvious question that's probably running through your head right now. How in the world does someone earning $45,000 a year manage to save $10,000 annually? That's more than 20% of their gross income. The answer is they have to be incredibly intentional about it, which most people are not. This is where most people's wealth building attempts fail. They don't lack income, they lack intentionality about expenses and priorities. See, the average American household spends money in a way that leaves almost nothing left over by the end of each month. They've made 1,000 small decisions that add up to financial stagnation. A subscription service here, a restaurant meal there, upgraded phone plans, streaming services. It's not usually one massive expense that destroys financial plans. It's 1,000 small ones that collectively prevent any wealth accumulation. Think about it this way. If you're spending 20% of your income on things that provide temporary pleasure but no lasting value, that's the 20% that could be building your million-dollar fortune. Most people would rather have the subscription services and restaurant meals and upgraded phones than be a millionaire. That's not a judgment. That's just the reality of behavioral economics and delayed gratification. The first major component of how regular people build million-dollar net worth without high incomes is absolute clarity about spending. You have to know exactly where your money goes. Not approximately, not roughly, exactly. Most people have no idea how much they spend on various categories. They have a vague sense that their money disappears but can't articulate where. When you start tracking every dollar, something remarkable happens. You start to see patterns that were invisible before. You realize you're spending $200 a month on coffee shop visits that you didn't consciously intend to make. You notice you're paying for gym memberships, streaming services, and magazine subscriptions that you never use anymore. You see the small daily choices that add up to massive annual expenditures over time. This is the unsexy first step that millionaires on average incomes don't skip. They get radical clarity about their spending. The second component is having a spending plan that actually works for your life, not some theoretical budget that ignores reality. Here's where most budget advice fails. It's written by people who've never actually tried to stick to a budget while living a normal life. They'll tell you to cut everything down to bare minimums and live like a college student forever. That's not sustainable for most people. Instead, what actually works is having a clear priority system. You identify what matters most to you and allocate resources accordingly. For someone committed to building wealth, the priority is simple: housing, basic food, utilities, transportation, and all other essentials come first. Then you allocate your savings target as if it were a bill that must be paid, not as something you'll do if there's money left over. You treat savings like a mortgage payment or rent. It gets paid first. Everything else gets divided up among remaining categories. This means you might spend less on dining out, entertainment, clothing, and travel while you're in wealth building mode. Notice I said less, not nothing. Most millionaires on average incomes don't live like monks. They still eat out occasionally. They still take vacations. They still buy things they want. But they do it intentionally within their means. The third component is becoming obsessed with earning more than you currently do. Now, I know this seems contradictory to what I just said about not needing high income, but here's the distinction. You don't need a high income to build wealth, but earning more than you do now accelerates the timeline significantly. When someone making $45,000 a year gets a raise to $48,000, most people immediately raise their lifestyle costs. They don't consciously decide to do this, but it happens naturally. They upgrade their living space, their car situation, their dining preferences. What millionaires on average incomes do differently is they capture that raise. When they earn more, they save more. They might let their lifestyle improve slightly, but nowhere near proportionally to their income increase. If they get a $3,000 annual raise, they might let their lifestyle improve by $500 and save the other $2,500. Over decades, this compounds dramatically. Each salary increase feeds the wealth-building machine rather than the consumption machine. This is where side income becomes incredibly powerful for people on average salaries. If you earn $45,000 from your primary job and another $10,000 to $15,000 from side work or freelancing, you've essentially doubled your potential savings rate. You don't need to get a fancy degree or change careers. You just need to create additional income streams that you immediately invest. A teacher tutoring students after hours, an accountant doing tax preparation on weekends, electrician taking on side jobs. These income sources don't need to be massive. They just need to be consistent and directed entirely toward wealth building. The fourth major component is becoming ruthlessly strategic about major expenses. This is where most people leave massive amounts of money on the table without realizing it. Housing is typically the biggest expense in any household budget, representing 25 to 35% of income for most people. Millionaires on average incomes don't necessarily live in tiny houses, but they're incredibly intentional about housing decisions. They might live in a modest home in an affordable area instead of stretching to maximum borrowing capacity for a fancy house. They might have a modest mortgage, or even better, they build equity ownership over time and pay it off before retirement. The difference between someone getting a $300,000 house that costs $200,000 and someone getting a $450,000 house that costs $300,000 is massive over 30 years. That extra $100,000 in monthly payments represents thousands and thousands of dollars in wealth building potential that gets diverted to housing costs. Transportation is another major expense where regular people make decisions that destroy wealth without realizing it. Earlier, I talked about the car payment trap where people finance vehicles they can't really afford. Millionaires on average incomes don't do this. They drive reliable used cars that are paid off, or they drive older cars that have appreciated over time. They avoid the wealth destruction of negative equity and massive depreciation hits. Someone paying $500 a month for a car payment for 5 years is forgoing $30,000 in wealth building capital right there. Over a 30-year career, the compounding cost of multiple vehicle decisions could easily represent $200,000 or more in lost wealth. Insurance, maintenance, and fuel costs are substantially lower for used vehicles, which further accelerates wealth building. Food and dining is another category where millionaires on average incomes make very different choices. This doesn't mean they never eat at restaurants, it means they eat at home more frequently. Someone spending $400 monthly on restaurant meals instead of cooking at home is spending $800 annually on that difference. Over 30 years, that's $144,000 that could be invested. Factor in investment growth, and that's potentially $500,000 or more in lost wealth. Millionaires on average incomes have learned to cook. They genuinely enjoy home-cooked meals. They don't see it as deprivation. This is the behavioral shift that actually matters. It's not about suffering, it's about changing what brings you fulfillment. The fifth component is becoming incredibly intentional about debt. The only debt that most millionaires on average incomes carry is a modest mortgage on a home they'll pay off over time. They avoid credit card debt like it's a plague. They avoid car loans. They avoid student loan debt if possible. Every dollar paid in interest to lenders is a dollar that doesn't compound on your behalf. When you're building wealth on an average income, every percentage point of interest costs you substantially over time. Someone paying 8% interest on a $20,000 car loan is paying nearly $4,000 in interest for the privilege of driving that vehicle today. That $4,000 invested over 30 years at 8% growth would become almost $100,000. So paying that car loan essentially costs $100,000 in future wealth, not just the $4,000 in interest. This is why millionaires on average incomes are almost pathologically focused on debt avoidance. Sixth is maximizing retirement account contributions, which is essentially a wealth-building cheat code that most people don't fully exploit. When you contribute to a 401k or traditional IRA, you get an immediate tax deduction that creates a government-subsidized savings mechanism. Someone in a 25% tax bracket saving $5,000 to a traditional 401k only reduces their take-home pay by $3,750. The government essentially subsidizes $1,250 of that savings through tax reduction. Over 30 years, this tax subsidy effect can represent tens of thousands of dollars in additional wealth accumulation. More importantly, retirement accounts typically grow tax-free or tax-deferred, which means compound growth works more efficiently. A dollar in a taxable investment account where you pay taxes on dividends annually will compound less effectively than a dollar in a 401k. Over 30 years, this difference can represent hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional wealth. Millionaires on average incomes max out their retirement contributions or get as close as they possibly can to the limits. They understand that this is the most tax-efficient wealth-building vehicle available to regular people. Seventh is developing a deep understanding of investment basics and refusing to pay high fees for investment management. This is where many people on average incomes sabotage their wealth-building efforts without realizing it. They give their money to financial advisors who charge 1% or more in annual fees to invest in high-cost mutual funds. Someone with a $500,000 portfolio paying 1% in fees is paying $5,000 annually just for the privilege of having their money invested. That $5,000 annual fee represents real wealth destruction when you're building on a limited savings rate. Millionaires on average incomes typically invest in low-cost index funds through Vanguard, Fidelity, or similar providers. They might pay 0.05% in annual fees instead of 1% or higher with active managers. The difference between 0.05% and 1% in fees compounds dramatically over decades. Someone with $500,000 paying 0.05% in fees pays $250 annually. Someone paying 1% pays $5,000 over 10 years, assuming 8% market returns. That fee difference could represent $30,000 or more in additional wealth. Over 30 years, the difference could easily exceed $150,000 or more depending on portfolio growth. This is why index fund investing is so powerful for regular people building wealth. It's simple, low cost, and actually statistically beats most active managers. The eighth component is understanding lifestyle inflation and actively fighting against it. Lifestyle inflation is the tendency for people to increase their spending as their income increases. Someone making $40,000 who gets a promotion to $55,000 naturally starts spending more. New car, nicer apartment, more dining out. Before they know it, they're spending $54,000 on a $55,000 salary and wondering where the raise went. Millionaires on average incomes understand this psychological trap and actively fight against it. When they get a raise, they celebrate mentally by allocating some of it to lifestyle improvements, but most of it goes to savings. They've made a conscious decision that building wealth is more important than lifestyle inflation, at least during their accumulation years. This doesn't mean they live in poverty or deprive themselves entirely. It means they're strategic about when and how they let their lifestyle improve. The ninth component is avoiding lifestyle inflation adjacent behaviors like keeping up with peers or comparing your life to others. Social comparison is one of the most destructive financial forces in modern society. You see a coworker buy a new truck and suddenly that reliable used sedan feels inadequate. You see a friend take an expensive vacation and your planned staycation feels like failure. You see someone on social media with a fancy house and suddenly your modest home feels embarrassing. This comparison trap destroys more wealth-building plans than any single other factor. Millionaires on average incomes have fundamentally different reference points for success and fulfillment. They're not comparing themselves to their peers in a materialistic sense. They're comparing their current financial situation to their past financial situation. They derive satisfaction from building net worth, not from owning impressive possessions. This is the psychological shift that actually enables someone on an average income to become a millionaire. They've chosen internal metrics of success over external ones. They care about what they own and how much they're worth more than what others think they should own. The 10th component is time horizon and patience that most people simply don't have. Building $1 million net worth on an average income requires decades, usually 3 to 4 decades. This is where most people give up before they even start. They want to be wealthy now, not in 30 years. But here's the reality. If you're young right now and you commit to this path for 30 years, you will absolutely become a millionaire. The math is inescapable. Consistent savings, compound growth, and time will create millionaires out of average income people. But it requires patience that our consumer culture actively trains us away from having. We're conditioned to want immediate gratification, immediate results, immediate wealth. The idea of delaying gratification for 30 years seems laughable in a culture obsessed with instant everything. Millionaires on average incomes don't share this cultural programming. They can delay gratification because they understand the math. They understand that choosing the cheap apartment now means they can choose the nice house later because they've built real wealth. They understand that driving the used car now means they can buy the nice car later without debt because they have money instead of payments. This temporal reframing is crucial to making the sacrifice feel worthwhile. You're not sacrificing for 30 years. You're investing in your future self for 30 years, and your future self will be incredibly grateful. So what does this all look like when we put the pieces together in an actual life? Let's create a realistic example of someone building $1 million net worth on an average income. Meet Sarah. She's 30 years old and makes $48,000 annually at her job as an office manager. After taxes, her take-home is about $36,000 per year, or $3,000 monthly. Her rent is $900 monthly for a modest apartment in an affordable area. Her utilities run $150 monthly. She drives a used Honda Civic that she paid off years ago. Her car insurance is $90 monthly. She has a modest grocery budget of $250 monthly and eats out maybe 3 times per month for about $120 total. Other necessities like phone, internet, and basic living expenses total about $400 monthly. That's approximately $2,000 in total monthly expenses, leaving her with roughly $1,000 monthly or $12,000 annually to save and invest. She opens a Roth IRA and maxes out her contribution of $6,500 per year, which takes up about 55% of her savings. The remaining $5,500 goes into a regular taxable brokerage account invested in low-cost index funds. She's earning 8% average annual returns on her investments, which is historically reasonable for a diversified portfolio. Now let's fast forward her actual wealth accumulation. After 10 years, Sarah's invested $115,000, and that's grown with compound returns to about $185,000. After 20 years, she's invested $240,000, and that's grown to approximately $595,000 in total net worth. After 30 years, she's invested $360,000, and that's grown to over $1.2 million in net worth. Now here's the crucial part of this example. Sarah never earned a high income. She never got a lucky break or inheritance. She did get occasional raises that she mostly directed to savings instead of lifestyle improvements, which accelerated her timeline. She had the discipline to maintain her spending at roughly the same level even as her income grew. She automated her savings so she wasn't tempted to spend money that was automatically going to investments. She avoided major financial mistakes like financing cars, accumulating credit card debt, or making bad housing decisions. She understood the power of time and compound growth and trusted the math enough to stay disciplined. And 30 years later, she's a millionaire without ever earning more than about $60,000 annually due to modest raises. Now, I want to address something important that might be running through your head right now. What if you're not starting at 30? What if you're 40 or 50 and you haven't been doing this? Does that mean millionaire status is impossible for you? Not necessarily, but it does require more aggressive action and potentially some additional income growth. Someone starting this journey at 40 instead of 30 has half the time for compound growth to work. This means they need to save more aggressively, perhaps 20% of income instead of 15%. It means side income becomes more important because they need to accelerate their savings rate. It means they need to be even more intentional about avoiding lifestyle inflation and financial mistakes. But it's absolutely still possible to build significant wealth from 40 to 70 if you're disciplined. You might not hit $1 million, but you could absolutely build $500,000 in net worth, which still provides significant financial security. The other thing I want to address is the role of market returns in this equation. I've used 8% average annual returns, which is historically reasonable for a diversified stock portfolio over long periods. But markets don't return 8% every single year. Some years are down, some years are way up. This is where maintaining discipline becomes even more important during down market years. When the market is down 20%, your portfolio looks terrible. You're tempted to sell and get out. This is exactly when you should be investing more, not less, because assets are on sale. Millionaires on average incomes understand this. They don't panic during market downturns. They actually increase contributions if they can, because they understand that market downturns are wealth-building opportunities if you have cash to deploy. This contrarian thinking is a hallmark of successful wealth builders on average incomes. There's one final element I want to discuss that's absolutely crucial to this whole equation. It's the mindset shift from thinking like a consumer to thinking like an investor. Most people think like consumers. They think about what they can afford to buy right now. Can I afford this $300 purchase? If I have the money or available credit, the answer is yes. Investors think completely differently. They think about opportunity cost and what that money could become. Instead of asking, can I afford this? They ask, what will this cost me in future wealth? That $300 purchase isn't really costing $300. If you would have invested it at 8% returns over 30 years, it's costing you roughly $2,500 in future wealth. This shifts your entire decision-making calculus. Suddenly, that $300 doesn't seem like such a great idea. Your daily coffee purchase isn't costing you $5, it's costing you $100 in future wealth when compounded over decades. Most people find this framework incredibly powerful once they understand it. They don't feel deprived, they feel liberated. They're choosing to be wealthy later instead of comfortable now. And here's the beautiful part. Once you're wealthy, you can actually afford those expensive purchases without guilt or financial strain. That future Sarah we talked about, after 30 years, she's got $1 million in net worth. She can absolutely afford to buy an expensive car, take expensive vacations, and enjoy life in ways her younger self couldn't imagine. But she'll do it from a position of wealth, not debt. From abundance, not struggle. She'll do it knowing that her investments are still compounding and building her future wealth. So the mystery of how regular people become millionaires isn't really a mystery at all. It's a combination of spending less than you earn, investing the difference consistently, and trusting compound growth over decades. It requires discipline and patience and the willingness to think differently about money and success than most of society. But the math is inescapable. You absolutely can become a millionaire on an average income if you're willing to be intentional about it. The next time you hear about someone with a regular job who somehow built $1 million in net worth, you'll know it's not luck. It's not some secret that rich people don't want you to know. It's basic mathematics combined with behavioral discipline. And if they can do it, so can you, starting today. The question is just whether you're willing to